The wealthiest cattle baron in Texas territory knelt in the dirt beside a woman the whole town called worthless. Rhett Mercer had 12,000 acres, more money than 3 counties combined, and a loneliness that was killing him from the inside out. So he did something crazy. He threw away his name, dressed like a nobody, and showed up at Clara Whitmore's failing orchard asking for work, just to see if anyone could love a man with empty pockets. What he found there would cost him everything he thought he wanted, and give him the one thing he never knew he needed. If you're watching this, stay until the end. You won't believe where this story goes. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Hit that like button, and let's get into it. The autumn market in Clover Ridge smelled like livestock, overripe pumpkins, and desperation. Rhett Mercer stood near the livestock pens in a tailored coat that probably cost more than most families earned in 6 months, watching the chaos unfold around him with the detached interest of someone who'd seen it all before. Crowds pushed past vendor stalls selling preserves, leather goods, quilts. Children screamed, chickens squawked in wooden crates. Somewhere a fiddle player sawed out a tune nobody was listening to. Rhett wasn't supposed to be here. He had people who handled this kind of thing, buying supplies, negotiating prices, shaking hands with farmers who reeked of manure and optimism. But lately, the silence in his house had gotten so thick he could barely breathe through it, and he'd saddled his horse before dawn just to be somewhere else. Anywhere else. He was 34 years old, owned the largest cattle operation in 3 territories, had a house with 14 rooms he never used and a dining table built for 12 that seated 1. His mother lived in Dallas now, hosting parties for people whose names all sounded the same. His father had died 4 years ago and left him an empire that felt more like a prison with every passing season. "Mercer!" Rhett turned. Jonas Pike was pushing through the crowd, grinning like they were old friends. They weren't. Pike owned the bank and half the commercial buildings on Main Street, and his handshake always felt like a business transaction. "Didn't expect to see you slumming it with the rest of us," Pike said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Thought you'd send your foreman." "Needed the air." "Well, you picked a good day for it. Harvest Festival brings out the whole county." Pike gestured toward a cluster of well-dressed families near the apple cider stand. "The Harrisons are here. Brought their daughter. You met Elizabeth, didn't you? At the Founders' Day social?" Rhett had. Elizabeth Harrison was 22, blonde, appropriately educated, and so boring he'd nearly fallen asleep during their one conversation about her watercolor paintings. Her father owned a railroad spur. Her mother collected china. Elizabeth herself collected marriage proposals from men who saw her father's railroad connections and heard wedding bells. "I met her," Rhett said. Pike either missed the tone or ignored it. "Fine family. Good bloodlines. Your mother would approve." Rhett's mother approved of anyone with a pedigree and a trust fund. She'd been introducing him to suitable girls since he was 25, each one more interchangeable than the last. They all had the same practiced laugh, the same carefully neutral opinions, the same way of looking at him like he was a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. "I'll keep that in mind," Rhett said, which was his polite way of saying he'd rather be trampled by his own cattle. Pike launched into some story about railroad expansion and property values, but Rhett stopped listening. His attention had snagged on something happening near the cider stand, a commotion that didn't quite fit the festival atmosphere. A man was shouting. Rhett couldn't make out the words yet, but the tone was ugly. Mean. The kind of voice that enjoyed having an audience. People were starting to turn, forming a loose circle around whatever drama was unfolding. Rhett moved closer, something cold settling in his chest. The man doing the shouting was maybe 60, weathered and thin, with the red-faced anger of someone who'd been drinking since breakfast. He stood in front of a cider stand that looked like it had been built by someone who actually knew what they were doing. Sturdy table, hand-painted sign, glass jars arranged in neat rows. Behind the stand was a woman. She was big, not fat exactly, but solid. Broad-shouldered and tall, with thick arms and work-roughened hands. Her hair was brown and pulled back in a braid that was coming loose. She wore a simple dress that had been mended more than once, and her face had the kind of plainness that made people look past her without really seeing her at all. The angry man, her father, Rhett realized, seeing the resemblance in the jawline, was berating her in front of at least 30 people. "I told you to bring the apple butter. How many times do I have to tell you the same damn thing?" The woman's voice was quiet. "We sold out yesterday, Pa. I told you that this morning." Don't you talk back to me." He slapped his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the jars. Several people in the crowd flinched. The woman didn't. "I built this business from nothing, and you can't even follow simple instructions." That was a lie. Rhett didn't know how he knew, but he knew. The stand, the product, the carefully arranged display, none of that had the fingerprints of a drunk with a short temper. This was the woman's work, her business, her effort, and her father was taking credit for it in front of everyone who mattered. "I'm sorry, Pa," she said. Still quiet, still calm. Like she'd had this conversation 1,000 times before. "Sorry, don't pay the bills." He grabbed one of the jars, berry preserves from the look of it, and held it up to the light. "And what's this? You didn't strain it right. Look at that, full of seeds. You think people want to pay good money for garbage?" "That's blackberry jam," the woman said. "It's supposed to have seeds." The slap came so fast, Rhett barely saw it. The man's palm connected with the side of the woman's face with a crack that cut through the festival noise like a gunshot. Her head snapped to the side. The crowd went silent. She didn't cry, didn't raise her hand to her cheek, just stood there, breathing carefully, while her father shook his finger in her face. "Don't you ever correct me in public, Clara. You hear me? Don't you ever—" He didn't finish. His boot came down on one of the jars that had fallen during his tantrum, crushing it into the dirt. Blackberry jam and broken glass spread across the ground in a dark stain. "Clean that up," he ordered. Then louder to the crowd, "My apologies, folks. My daughter's got more strength than sense sometimes, but we've still got plenty of fine cider and preserves for sale. Best prices in the county." Some people drifted back to browsing the stand. Others wandered away, embarrassed or uncomfortable, or just unwilling to get involved. Elizabeth Harrison whispered something to her mother, and they both turned their backs, disappearing into the crowd. Clara, that was her name, apparently, knelt in the dirt and started picking up pieces of broken glass with her bare hands. Her father had already moved on to charming a potential customer, his voice jovial and warm like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. Rhett stood there, frozen. He'd seen men beat horses, seen fathers discipline sons, seen plenty of cruelty in his 34 years, but there was something about this that hit different. Maybe it was the woman's silence, maybe it was the way everyone just accepted it, like this was normal, like she deserved it. Clara glanced up for just a second, and their eyes met. She had brown eyes, dark, like creek water in shadow. And in that brief moment before she looked away again, Rhett saw something that made his chest tighten. Not shame, not anger, not even sadness, just a bone-deep weariness, the kind that came from carrying weight nobody else would help you lift. Then she went back to picking up glass, and Rhett turned and walked away before he did something stupid. He made it halfway to his horse before Pike caught up with him again. "Shame about the Whitmore girl," Pike said conversationally. "Used to be a decent family before the mother died. Now it's just Clara and that drunk father of hers. She does all the work, from what I hear. Runs the orchard, makes the cider, keeps the place from falling apart, but nobody wants to marry her." "Why not?" Rhett heard himself ask. Pike shrugged. "Look at her. She's built like a draft horse. Got no refinement, no education, and her father's reputation doesn't help. She'll probably end up a spinster or married to some widower who needs a cook and doesn't care what she looks like." He paused. "Sad, really, but that's life for girls like her." Rhett didn't trust himself to respond. He nodded once and kept walking. That night, he sat alone in his 14-room house and couldn't stop thinking about brown eyes and broken glass. About a woman who'd been slapped in public and then went back to work like it was just another Tuesday. About a crowd that watched and did nothing. About the fact that he'd done nothing. He drank half a bottle of whiskey and fell asleep in a chair. And when he woke up the next morning with a headache and the taste of regret in his mouth, he made a decision that would have sounded insane if he'd said it out loud. He was going to find out if anyone could love him for who he was, not what he owned. And he was going to start with the woman nobody else wanted. And so, 3 days later, a man calling himself Eli rode up to the Whitmore orchard on a borrowed horse, wearing clothes he'd bought from a ranch hand and carrying nothing but a bedroll and a nearly empty wallet. He'd left everything else behind. The tailored coats, the custom boots, the house and the cattle, and the name that opened doors from Dallas to Santa Fe. He told his foreman he was taking a few weeks to scout new property up north, left his best horse in the stable, and transformed himself into exactly the kind of person he'd spent his whole life avoiding. A nobody with no prospects and nothing to offer, except a strong back and a willingness to work. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The Whitmore place wasn't hard to find. About 8 miles outside Clover Ridge, down a rutted road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. The orchard itself sprawled across maybe 40 acres. Apple trees mostly, old and gnarled, with a few pear trees mixed in. A barn that leaned slightly to the left. A house that needed paint and new shutters. Everything looked tired but functional, held together by determination and constant repair. Eli now, dismounted near the barn and stood there, suddenly uncertain. This had seemed like a good idea at 3 in the morning after too much whiskey. Now, in the cold light of an October afternoon, it felt ridiculous. What was he even doing here? The barn door opened and Clara Whitmore emerged carrying a toolbox that looked like it weighed 40 pounds. She stopped when she saw him, eyes narrowing. "Help you?" Up close, she was even taller than he'd thought, maybe 5'10". Her dress was practical, worn, patched at the elbows. Her hands were calloused and stained with what looked like axle grease. She smelled like apples and wood smoke and honest work. Eli cleared his throat. "I'm looking for employment, ma'am. Heard you might need help with the harvest." Heard wrong. She shifted the toolbox to her other hand. "We don't hire out. I don't need much, just meals and a place to sleep. I'm good with my hands, and I learn fast." Clara looked him over with the assessing eye of someone who'd been lied to before. "You don't look like a ranch hand." Panic flickered through him. He'd been careful, bought worn clothes, skipped shaving for 3 days, left his expensive saddle behind. But maybe he'd missed something. "What do I look like?" "Lost." She said it without malice, just observation. "Where are you coming from?" "North of here, been traveling a while." That was technically true if you counted 3 days as a while. "And you just happened to hear the Whitmore orchard needed help?" "From who?" Eli scrambled for an answer that wouldn't sound suspicious. "Bartender in town mentioned it. Said you had a big harvest coming and only 2 people to handle it." "1 person," Clara corrected. "My father doesn't do the actual work." There was no bitterness in her voice when she said it. Just fact. Like saying the sky was blue or winter was cold. "Then you definitely need help," Eli said. Clara studied him for a long moment. Her brown eyes were sharp, measuring. Rhett had the uncomfortable feeling she could see straight through whatever disguise he'd constructed. Finally, she sighed. "Can you fix a wagon wheel?" Probably. Probably's not good enough. Can you or can't you?" "I can learn," Eli said. "Show me once. I'll have it." "What about pressing cider? Pruning trees, mucking stalls, splitting firewood?" She rattled off the list like she was testing him. "Because I don't have time to teach someone who's going to quit after 2 days when they realize actual work isn't as romantic as they thought." Eli met her eyes. "I won't quit. They all say that." "I mean it." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, exactly, but maybe a cautious willingness to take a chance. "There's a cot in the barn. Meals are at dawn, noon, and sunset. You eat what I cook, when I cook it. You work from sunup to sundown, and you do what you're told without argument. Pay is 50 cents a day, plus room and board." 50 cents a day. Rhett spent more than that on cigars. "That's fair. And if my father comes around asking questions, you're a drifter I took pity on. Nothing more. Understood?" "Understood." Clara nodded once, sharp and businesslike. "Get your horse settled. Work starts at dawn tomorrow." She turned to go, then paused. "What's your name?" "Eli." "Eli." He scrambled for a last name and landed on the first thing that came to mind. "Cooper?" "Well, Eli Cooper, welcome to the Whitmore orchard. Try not to get yourself killed." She walked away before he could ask what that meant. Eli learned what it meant at approximately 5:47 the next morning when a rooster screamed directly outside the barn and he fell off the cot in a tangle of blankets and confusion. Dawn at the Whitmore orchard wasn't a gentle, poetic thing. It was cold and dark and came way too early. By the time he'd pulled on his clothes and stumbled outside, Clara was already in the yard, sleeves rolled up, working a hand pump to fill a water trough. "You're late," she said without looking at him. "The rooster? That's Brutus. He crows at 5:30 every morning. You'll get used to it." She finished pumping and straightened, brushing hair out of her face. There's coffee in the kitchen. Drink it fast. We've got 200 trees to check before noon. Coffee turned out to be a generous term for the black bitter liquid Clara had brewed in a pot that looked older than both of them combined. Eli drank it anyway, burning his tongue in the process, and followed her out to the orchard. The work was brutal. Clara moved through those trees like she'd been born among them, checking for rot, marking branches that needed pruning, assessing which sections were ready for harvest. Eli tried to keep up and failed spectacularly. He tripped over roots, dropped the marking chalk, confused apple varieties until Clara looked at him like he might be brain damaged. "That's a Rome," she said, pointing to a tree with dark red fruit. "That's a wine sap. That's a York Imperial. How do you not know apples?" "I'm more of a beef person," Eli said weakly. Clara's expression suggested that explained a lot. By noon, Eli's back ached. His hands were covered in small cuts from the branches, and he was pretty sure he'd sweated through his shirt despite the October chill. Clara, meanwhile, looked like she'd been out for a light stroll. Lunch was bread, cheese, and apples eaten standing up in the barn while Clara explained the afternoon's task, repairing the cider press. "The main screws stripped," she said, showing him a massive wooden contraption that looked like it belonged in a medieval torture museum. "I ordered a replacement part from the blacksmith, but it won't be ready for another week, so we're going to jury-rig this one until then." "How do you jury-rig a screw?" Clara gave him a look that suggested she was already regretting hiring him. "We'll figure it out. Hand me that wrench." They spent the next 4 hours taking apart a machine that clearly didn't want to be taken apart. Bolts were rusted, wood had swelled. At one point, Clara had to climb inside the press itself, wedging herself into a space that barely fit her shoulders, while Eli held a lantern and tried not to think about what would happen if the whole thing collapsed. "Little to the left," Clara's voice echoed from inside the press. "No, your other left. There. Hold it steady." Something clanged. Clara swore, which surprised Eli. She didn't seem like the swearing type. "You okay in there? Drop the washer. Can you see it?" Eli peered into the darkness. "No, of course not." More clanging. "Okay, I'm coming out. Don't let that bar slip." She emerged backward, cobwebs in her hair and grease on her face, looking frustrated but not defeated. That seemed to be her default state, frustrated but moving forward anyway. "We'll have to order another washer," she said, sitting back on her heels, "which means another week before this thing's operational." "Can't we make one?" "Out of what? Thin air and optimism? I don't know, metal? There's got to be scrap around here somewhere." Clara looked at him like he'd suggested they build a flying machine. "You know how to work metal?" "I know people who do." That was true. Rhett's blacksmith could probably forge a replacement washer in his sleep, but Eli the drifter wasn't supposed to know professional blacksmiths. "That's not helpful," Clara said. She stood, brushing dirt off her dress. "We'll make it work. We always do." She glanced at the angle of the sun. "Come on, still got evening chores before supper." Evening chores turned out to include feeding chickens, which involved getting pecked by an aggressive hen Clara called the Duchess, mucking out the horse stall, worse than it sounded, splitting firewood, harder than it looked, and repairing a section of fence that had been knocked down by what Clara called the neighbor's idiot bull. By the time they finished, Eli could barely lift his arms. "Supper's in 10 minutes, Clara said, heading toward the house. Don't be late." Eli used those 10 minutes to collapse against the barn wall and seriously reconsider every decision that had led him to this moment. He was Rhett Mercer. He owned more land than some small countries. He had people who did this kind of work for him. What the hell was he trying to prove? Then Clara rang the dinner bell, and he dragged himself upright and went inside because quitting on day one would be pathetic even by his standards. The kitchen was small but clean, with a wood stove that radiated warmth and a table that had been scrubbed so many times the grain showed through. Claire was pulling something out of the oven, a pot roast that smelled so good Eli's stomach cramped with hunger. "Sit," she said, nodding toward a chair. There were only 2 place settings. "Your father's not joining us?" "He's in town. Won't be back until late, if at all." Clara set the roast on the table along with boiled potatoes and carrots. "He's not really the family dinner type." She said it like it didn't bother her, but Eli was starting to recognize the careful blankness that crossed her face when she talked about her father. It was the same expression she'd worn at the market right before he'd slapped her. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The food was simple but good. Better than good, actually. Clara could cook. "This is excellent," Eli said. Clara glanced up, surprised. "It's just pot roast." "Still excellent." She looked uncomfortable with the compliment, like she didn't know what to do with it. "Eat faster. You're going to need your strength tomorrow." "Tomorrow's harder than today?" "Tomorrow we start the actual harvest. Today was just inventory." She cut into her meat with precise movements. "I figure we can do the east section first, then work our way west. If the weather holds, we should have most of it pressed within 3 weeks." "Just the two of us?" "That's all there is." Eli thought about his own harvest crews, 30 men strong, equipped with the latest equipment, working in coordinated teams. Clara was planning to harvest 40 acres with one drifter who didn't know the difference between apple varieties. "We'll manage," Clara said, reading his doubt. "We always do." There was that phrase again. We always do. Like survival was just another chore on the list. After dinner, Clara washed dishes while Eli dried. Their movements fell into an easy rhythm. She'd hand him a clean plate, he'd dry it, and stack it on the shelf. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but it wasn't companionable either. More like two people existing in the same space without quite knowing how to bridge the gap between them. "You can go rest," Clara finally said, handing him the last dish. "We start at dawn." "Does everything start at dawn around here?" "Most things." She dried her hands on her apron. "You did okay today. Better than I expected." Coming from Clara, that sounded like high praise. "Thanks. Don't let it go to your head. Tomorrow you'll probably break something expensive." But there was the ghost of a smile on her face when she said it. Eli returned to the barn, climbed onto his cot, and was asleep before his head hit the pillow. He woke to Brutus the rooster screaming bloody murder and realized, with a mixture of horror and resignation, that he'd just signed up for 3 weeks of this. The first week passed in a blur of aching muscles and spectacular failures. Eli broke a ladder. Clara fixed it. Lost the apple-picking pole in a tree. Clara retrieved it. Dropped an entire basket of York Imperials down a hill. Clara didn't say anything, just pressed her lips together and walked away. He learned that Clara was up at least an hour before him every morning, that she could repair nearly anything with baling wire and determination, and that she had exactly 0 patience for incompetence, but infinite patience for honest effort. He also learned she was desperately, crushingly lonely. It showed in small ways. The way she paused sometimes when she was explaining a task, like she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone actually listen. The way she'd make extra coffee without being asked, then look embarrassed about it. The way she'd started leaving the barn door open while she worked, even though October nights were getting cold, just so she could hear if Eli needed help with something. On the 8th day, her father showed up. Eli was up on a ladder harvesting apples from the high branches when he heard shouting from the direction of the house. He climbed down fast, instinct telling him something was wrong. Clara's father, Eli had learned his name was Howard, stood in the yard, clearly drunk despite it being barely past noon. He was yelling at Clara about something while she stood there with her arms crossed, face expressionless. "Waste of money," Howard was saying. "Why the hell did you hire help without asking me?" "Because we needed it," Clara said calmly. "We've got 40 acres to harvest and—" "We don't need help. We need you to work faster." He jabbed a finger at her chest. "I built this orchard from nothing, and I'm not going to watch you squander money on some drifter who'll rob us blind first chance he gets." Eli stepped into view, making his presence known. Howard's bleary eyes swung toward him. "Who the hell are you?" "Eli Cooper, sir. I'm working the harvest." "Like hell you are?" Howard lurched forward, and Eli caught the smell of cheap whiskey rolling off him in waves. "Get off my property before I throw you off." "Pa," Clara started. "Don't you paw me. This is my orchard, my business, my decision." He turned back to Eli. "You got 10 seconds to get gone, boy." Eli looked at Clara. Her jaw was tight, eyes hard. She gave a tiny shake of her head. "Don't engage, don't argue, just wait." So Eli waited. Howard ranted for another 5 minutes about ungrateful daughters and lazy drifters and the general decline of modern society. Eventually he ran out of steam, spat in the dirt, and announced he was going back to town where people showed him proper respect. The second his horse disappeared down the road, Clara's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He's worse when he's been drinking. Does he drink often? Clara's silence was answer enough. I can leave if it causes problems, Eli offered. No. The word came out sharp. No, you're staying. We need the help, and I already paid you for the week. She straightened, rebuilt whatever wall had briefly cracked. Let's get back to work. They didn't talk about it again. By the end of the second week, something had shifted. Eli couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the day Clara laughed, when he got his sleeve caught in the apple press and had to be cut free. Maybe it was the evening he found her trying to lift a barrel that was clearly too heavy and helped without being asked, their hands brushing in the process. Maybe it was the morning he woke early and found her sitting on the porch steps in the pre-dawn darkness, just staring at the orchard, looking so tired and small that something in his chest cracked. He'd sat down next to her without saying anything. After a long moment, she'd spoken. My mother planted these trees. Every single one. She'd bring me out here when I was little, let me help dig the holes. She said apples were patient. You put them in the ground, you take care of them, and they'll take care of you. Clara's voice was soft, almost dreamy. She died when I was 14. Pa couldn't handle it, started drinking, haven't really stopped since. I'm sorry, Eli said. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything. Clara pulled her knees up to her chest. I keep the orchard going because she would have wanted me to. Some days that's the only reason I get out of bed. Eli wanted to tell her she was remarkable, that her strength was extraordinary, that any man would be lucky to know her, let alone love her. But Eli Cooper the Drifter had no right to say those things, so he just sat there in silence while the sun came up and the trees turned gold in the early light. Clara stood eventually, brushing off her dress. We should start. East section won't harvest itself. And just like that, the moment passed. But Eli couldn't stop thinking about it. About a 14-year-old girl losing her mother and inheriting an orchard and a drunk father and a lifetime of responsibility she never asked for. About the fact that she kept going anyway. About the way she'd looked sitting on those steps, like someone who'd forgotten they were allowed to rest. That afternoon, while Clara was in town selling cider, Eli did something stupid. He rode into Clover Ridge, found the local feed store, and spent nearly all his remaining money on a new set of pruning shears to replace the rusty pair Clara had been using. Then he spent the rest on wildflower seeds, the kind that would bloom in spring and turn the orchard into something beautiful. He left them on her porch with no note, no explanation. When Clara asked about them the next day, he claimed ignorance. She looked at him for a long time, eyes searching, before she finally nodded and let it go. But she kept the shears, and she planted the seeds. The third week brought frost warnings and the kind of cold that made Eli's joints ache in ways they never had before. Clara seemed unaffected, moving through the orchard in the pre-dawn darkness with the same steady efficiency she brought to everything else. She'd started trusting him with more complicated tasks, operating the cider press unsupervised, handling the money when customers came to buy directly from the farm, even managing the books when she needed to make deliveries in town. That last one nearly gave Eli a heart attack. You want me to do what? He'd asked, staring at the ledger she'd thrust into his hands. Record the sales. It's not complicated. Name, quantity, amount paid. You can write, can't you? Yes, but then you'll be fine. Clara was already halfway to the wagon, loading crates of cider. I'll be back by sunset. Don't let my father near the cash box if he shows up. She'd left before Eli could protest further, and he'd spent the next hour staring at her handwriting in the ledger. Neat, precise, the numbers adding up to profits so slim it made him wonder how she kept the place running at all. The previous month's total income was less than what Rhett Mercer spent on a single horse. 3 customers came that afternoon. The first was an older woman who bought 2 gallons of cider and complimented the quality. The second was a young couple looking for preserves, who left with 6 jars and seemed genuinely pleased with the price. The third was a middle-aged man named Dalton, who showed up just before sunset, looked Eli up and down with obvious suspicion, and asked where Clara was. Making deliveries in town, Eli said. Can I help you with something? I'll wait for her. Dalton leaned against the fence, making no move to leave. You the new help? Yes, sir. She paying you fair? The question seemed loaded somehow. Fair enough, Dalton grunted. She's too generous, that one. Pays more than she should, works harder than 3 men, and what does she get for it? A drunk father and a failing orchard. He pulled out a pipe, took his time lighting it. You seem like a decent fellow. Word of advice, don't get attached. This place won't last another winter. Clara seems to think otherwise. Clara thinks a lot of things that ain't true, like that her father's going to sober up, like hard work's enough to save a place that's already drowning. Dalton blew out smoke. I offered to buy this land 6 months ago. Gave her a fair price, too. She turned me down flat. Pride, I guess. Or stubbornness? Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Eli kept his voice neutral. Maybe she just doesn't want to sell. What she wants and what's realistic are two different things. Dalton straightened, knocking ash from his pipe. You tell her I stopped by. Tell her the offer still stands, and she should think real hard about taking it before she loses everything. He left before Clara returned, which was probably for the best because Eli was having a hard time keeping his opinions to himself. The idea of someone like Dalton owning this place, tearing down what Clara's mother had planted, turning it into just another piece of property to flip for profit, it made his blood hot. When Clara's wagon rattled into the yard 20 minutes later, Eli was still angry. How'd it go? She asked, climbing down with that careful stiffness that meant her back was hurting. Fine. 3 sales. I wrote everything down. He handed her the ledger. Dalton stopped by. Clara's expression shuddered immediately. What did he want? To remind you his offer still stands, he said. Eli stopped himself. He said you should take it before you lose everything. Dalton can go to hell. Clara's voice was flat, final. This orchard isn't for sale. Not to him, not to anyone. Even if it's failing? She looked at him sharply. Who said it's failing? He did, and your books kind of back that up. Eli gestured at the ledger. Clara, last month you barely cleared expenses. One bad harvest, and I'll figure it out. She turned away, started unhitching the horse with movements that were a little too rough. I always figure it out. Maybe you shouldn't have to do it alone. I'm not alone. You're here, aren't you? For 3 weeks. Then what? Clara froze, her hands still on the harness. For a long moment she didn't move. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. Then I keep going. Same as always. Something twisted in Eli's chest. The idea of leaving, of going back to his real life and leaving Clara here to fight this battle by herself, suddenly felt impossible. Which was insane. He'd known her less than a month. This whole thing was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to prove some stupid point about whether people could love him without his money. But standing in that cold yard, watching Clara's shoulders hunch against the weight of too many years carrying too much alone, Eli realized the point didn't matter anymore. He didn't want to leave. I could stay longer, he heard himself say, if you needed. Clara didn't turn around. Why would you do that? Because you need help. Because this place deserves to survive. Because I'm falling for you. Because watching you work yourself to death is killing me. Because in 3 weeks you've made me feel more useful than 30 years of wealth ever did. He didn't say any of that. Instead, because the pay is terrible but the food is excellent. Clara's shoulders shook. For a horrible second, Eli thought she was crying, but then he heard the sound, laughter, rusty and surprised, like it had been locked away for years and forgotten how to work properly. The food is not excellent, she said, but she was smiling when she finally turned around. It's barely edible. I've had worse. Where? Prison? Ranch camps. Trust me, prison would be an upgrade. Clara shook her head, but the smile lingered. You're strange, Eli Cooper. You know that? I've been told. Most men would have quit by now. The work is hard, the pay is awful, and my father's a nightmare. Good thing I'm not most men. Something flickered in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. If you stay, it needs to be because you want to. Not because you feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for you. That was the truth. What he felt was admiration, respect, and a growing awareness that Clara Whitmore was probably the strongest person he'd ever met. I feel sorry for your rooster, though. Brutus is clearly suffering from delusions of adequacy. That surprised another laugh out of her. He's just doing his job. His job is to commit psychological warfare on sleeping people? His job is to wake us up. Not his fault you're a light sleeper. They fell into an easier rhythm after that. finishing the evening chores side by side while the sun set behind the trees and turned everything gold. Clara taught him the right way to clean the cider press. Apparently he'd been doing it wrong for 3 weeks, and Eli only made 2 mistakes, which Clara declared a personal record. Over supper, chicken and dumplings that were absolutely better than Clara wanted to admit, they talked about the next phase of work. Most of the harvest was done, but there was still processing to finish, equipment to winterize, repairs that couldn't wait until spring. The barn roof needs patching before the snow comes, Clara said, sopping up gravy with a piece of bread. And the fence along the south property line is about to fall over. Plus, I need to place orders for next year's supplies before prices go up. What about help? You can't do all that alone. I'll manage. Clara. She looked up, meeting his eyes. What? You don't have to manage everything by yourself. That's why people hire help. People with money hire help. I've got you for another few weeks, and then I'm back to the usual. She said it matter-of-factly, like it was just another unchangeable truth. That's reality. No point pretending otherwise. Eli wanted to argue, wanted to tell her he'd stay as long as she needed, that money didn't have to be an obstacle, that there were solutions if she'd just let someone help carry the weight. But Eli Cooper, the drifter, couldn't make those promises. And Rhett Mercer, the cattle baron, had no business being here in the first place. So instead, he said, "Then we'd better make the next few weeks count." Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I suppose we should." That night, lying on his cot in the barn, Eli made a decision. He couldn't tell Clara who he really was. Not yet, maybe not ever. But he could do something to help. Something that wouldn't reveal his identity, but might make her life a fraction easier. The next morning, before dawn, he rode into Clover Ridge and found Jonas Pike coming out of the bank. "Mercer!" Pike's surprise was genuine. "I thought you were up north looking at property. Change of plans." Rhett kept his voice low. They were alone on the street, but walls had ears in small towns. "I need a favor," quietly. Pike's expression shifted to interest. "What kind of favor?" "There's a property outside town, Whitmore Orchard. The owner owes money on some equipment repairs, supplies, that sort of thing." "Clara Whitmore?" "Yeah, I know the place. Her father's been borrowing against it for years. She's barely keeping her head above water. I want those debts cleared, all of them." Pike blinked. That's several $100s, Mercer." "I'm aware. And you want to pay off a complete stranger's debts because I'm asking you to." Rhett pulled out a billfold, his real one, the one he'd kept hidden in his saddlebag for emergencies. "Make it look like an accounting error. A church donation. I don't care. Just make sure she doesn't know where it came from." Pike took the money, counted it, and gave Rhett a look that was part confusion, part amusement. "You're a strange man, Mercer. You know that?" Second time in 2 days someone had said that. Maybe it was true. "Can you do it or not?" "I can do it. But people are going to ask questions when Clara Whitmore suddenly has her accounts cleared." "Then tell them it was an anonymous benefactor, someone who believed in supporting local businesses." "And if she investigates?" "She won't." Rhett hoped that was true. Clara was practical, not paranoid. If her debts disappeared, she'd probably just count her blessings and move on. Just make it happen. Pike pocketed the money. "Consider it done. Though I've got to say, this is the most interesting scouting trip you've ever taken." Rhett didn't respond to that. He was already heading back to his horse, back to the orchard, back to the life he'd built out of lies and good intentions. Clara noticed something was different 2 days later when the blacksmith's bill didn't arrive. Then the feed store sent word that her account was settled. By the end of the week, she'd received 3 separate notices that various outstanding debts had been mysteriously paid in full. She confronted Eli in the barn while he was mucking stalls. "Did you do this?" She waved the notices at him. Eli looked up, genuinely confused. "Do what?" "My debts. Someone paid them. All of them." Her eyes were sharp, searching. "Was it you?" "On 50 cents a day?" "Clara, I can barely afford tobacco." That was true enough. Eli Cooper didn't have the money for grand gestures. "Then who?" "Maybe you've got a secret admirer." "I don't have admirers, secret or otherwise." But doubt flickered across her face. "This doesn't make sense." "Does it matter? Your debts are paid. That's good news, isn't it?" Clara sat down on a hay bale, the notices crumpling in her grip. "I don't like charity." "It's not charity if you don't know who gave it." That makes it worse. Now I owe someone and I don't even know who. She looked up at him. You're sure it wasn't you? I'm sure. Technically, not a lie. Eli Cooper hadn't paid the debts. Rhett Mercer had. Maybe it was that benefactor Dalton mentioned. Dalton wants to buy my land, not save it. Then maybe it was someone from church, or a former customer, or I don't go to church, Clara rubbed her temples, and my customers barely have enough for themselves. Eli leaned against his pitchfork, watching her wrestle with the gift. Most people would be relieved. Clara looked like someone had just complicated her entire life. You could just accept it. Say thank you to whoever's listening and move on. I don't know how to do that. Sure you do. You say thank you and then you keep working, same as you do every other day. Clara looked at him for a long time. Finally she stood, folding the notices carefully. If I find out you're lying to me, Eli Cooper, I'm going to be very upset. Noted. She left and Eli went back to mucking the stall, trying to ignore the guilt churning in his stomach. He was lying to her, had been lying since the moment he'd showed up, and sooner or later she was going to find out. The question was what would happen when she did. That night, Clara cooked the best meal Eli had eaten since arriving: roast chicken, mashed potatoes with actual butter, green beans that didn't come from a can, and an apple pie that was probably illegal in several territories. What's the occasion? Eli asked, loading his plate. Celebrating. Clara didn't quite meet his eyes. Apparently I've got a secret benefactor, which means I can actually afford to feed my help properly. Your help has no complaints about the regular food. Your help is a liar. But she was smiling. Eat before it gets cold. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Eli found himself memorizing small details. The way Clara cut her chicken into precise, even pieces. The small scar on her thumb from some long-ago kitchen accident. The way she closed her eyes when she took the first bite of pie, like she was tasting something more than just apples and crust. My mother used to make pie like this, Clara said suddenly, every Sunday after church, even when we didn't have much. She said life was too short to skip dessert. Smart woman. She was. Clara pushed a piece of crust around her plate. She believed the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Used to drive my father crazy. He'd say she was naive, that people would take advantage. She'd just smile and say that was their problem, not hers. Sounds like you take after her. Clara's laugh was bitter. I'm nothing like her. She was kind, generous. I'm just stubborn. You're kind, Eli said. You're generous. You're also stubborn, but that's not a bad thing. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment. I know you feed strangers who show up looking for work. I know you pay fair wages even when you can barely afford it. I know you work yourself half to death to keep a place alive because your mother loved it. Eli set down his fork. That sounds pretty kind to me. Clara's eyes were suspiciously bright. She looked away, blinking fast. You should eat your pie before it gets cold. Pie doesn't get cold. Then eat it before I change my mind and take it back. Eli ate his pie. It was perfect, sweet and tart, and everything good about autumn condensed into pastry. And if he noticed Clara wiping her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, he had the good sense not to mention it. The weather turned properly cold the next week, bringing morning frost that crunched underfoot and made breath visible in the air. Clara started wearing a heavy coat that had probably belonged to her father decades ago, sleeves rolled up to fit her arms. Eli wore layers and still froze his ass off every morning while waiting for his blood to remember how to circulate. They worked on winterizing the orchard, wrapping young trees, clearing dead branches, reinforcing stakes against winter winds. It was tedious physical work that left little energy for conversation, but Eli found he didn't mind the silence. There was something peaceful about working alongside Clara, both of them focused on the same task, moving in unconscious coordination. On Thursday, Howard showed up again. Eli saw him coming up the road and went to find Clara. She was in the processing barn checking the cider stores. Your father's here. Clara's jaw tightened. Is he drunk? Can't tell from this distance. Then probably yes. She wiped her hands on her apron. Stay here. I'll handle it. Clara, Stay here, Eli. Please. There was something in her voice, not quite fear, but close enough that it made Eli's protective instincts flare. He watched from the barn door as Clara walked out to meet her father. Howard was definitely drunk. Even from a distance, Eli could see the unsteady way he sat his horse, the angry gestures as he started yelling before Clara even reached him. Heard you've been spending money, Howard's voice carried across the yard. New equipment, paying off debts. Where'd you get that kind of money? It wasn't. Don't you lie to me. I know you've been hiding profits, keeping the good money for yourself while I scrape by on nothing. I haven't been hiding anything, Pa. Someone paid the debts. I don't know who. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know my own daughter's a liar and a thief? Clara's voice stayed level. I'm not a thief, and I've never lied to you about the business. The hell you haven't. Howard swung down from his horse, stumbled, caught himself. This is my orchard, my business, and you've been running it behind my back, making decisions without asking, spending money that ain't yours to spend. The money was never yours. It came from... The slap echoed across the yard. Eli was moving before he made the conscious decision to move. He crossed the distance between the barn and Clara in maybe 5 seconds, putting himself between her and Howard before the older man could raise his hand again. That's enough, Eli said. His voice came out colder than he'd intended, carrying echoes of the authority he'd spent 3 weeks trying to hide. You need to leave. Howard blinked at him, swaying. Who the hell are you to tell me what to do on my own property? I'm the person telling you to leave. Now. You work for me, boy. I can fire you right now, throw you off this land. You don't work for him, Clara's voice cut in. She'd stepped around Eli, one hand pressed to her reddening cheek. He works for me. And he's right. You need to leave, Pa. Howard's face went purple. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you. You've done nothing for me since Ma died. Clara's voice shook, but she didn't back down. I run this orchard. I pay the bills. I keep food on the table. You just show up when you need money for drinking. This place wouldn't exist without me. Ma built this place. You're just living off her memory. For a second, Eli thought Howard might actually hit her again. His fist clenched, his whole body coiling. But something in Clara's eyes, some hard, immovable thing, made him hesitate. You're going to regret this, Howard finally said. When this place falls apart and you've got nothing, you remember whose fault it was. I'll remember, Clara said quietly. Howard spat at her feet, climbed back on his horse with difficulty, and rode off without looking back. Clara stood there, hand still pressed to her cheek, breathing carefully. Eli waited, not sure what to say or do. Finally, Clara lowered her hand and looked at him. Thank you, she said, for stepping in. He had no right. He's my father. He thinks he has every right. Clara turned toward the house. I should get back to work. Clara, you don't have to. I need to work, Eli. It's what I do. She paused at the porch steps. If you're staying, I need you to promise something. Anything. Don't interfere with him again. I know you meant well, but it just makes things worse. Her voice was tired, defeated. He's my problem to handle. Eli wanted to argue, wanted to tell her no one should have to handle being hit, that her father was a drunk and a bully, and deserved to be thrown off the property permanently. But he could see the exhaustion in Clara's shoulders, the way she held herself like something was about to break. Okay, he said. I promise. Clara nodded once and went inside. Eli stood in the yard for a long time after, hands clenched into fists, trying to remember why he'd thought this disguise was a good idea. Rhett Mercer could have solved this problem in 5 minutes, could have bought the orchard outright, hired security, made sure Howard Whitmore never came near his daughter again. But Eli Cooper couldn't do any of that without revealing who he really was. And Clara had trusted Eli, not Rhett. So Eli went back to work, swallowing his anger and his helplessness, and tried to figure out how to protect someone who didn't want to be protected. That evening, Clara didn't come to dinner. Eli waited until full dark, then knocked on the house door. No answer. He tried the handle, unlocked because apparently Clara didn't believe in security, and let himself in. The kitchen was empty. So was the sitting room. He found Clara in what must have been her mother's sewing room, sitting on the floor surrounded by old photographs and a quilt that looked half-finished. Clara? She looked up, eyes red but dry. I'm fine. You missed dinner. Wasn't hungry. Eli sat down across from her, careful not to disturb the photographs. They were mostly of a woman who looked like Clara might have looked with a different life. Same strong features, but softened by genuine smiles and the kind of happiness that came from being truly loved. Your mother? Eli asked. Clara nodded, picking up one of the photos. This was her favorite, taken right after they finished planting the orchard. She's holding me. I was maybe 2 years old. Pa's standing next to her, and he's actually smiling. She traced the image with one finger. He used to be different, before she died. Used to be almost kind. What happened? He loved her, really loved her. When she got sick, it broke something in him. Clara set the photo down carefully. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, kept the orchard going, made her proud, maybe he'd come back. The real him. But I don't think that person exists anymore. That's not your fault. Feels like it is. Clara pulled the quilt into her lap, running her hands over the unfinished pattern. She was making this when she died. Wedding ring pattern. She said it was for my future marriage, whenever that happened. Her laugh was hollow. Joke's on her. Nobody's going to marry someone like me. That's not true. Yes, it is. I'm too tall, too plain, too difficult. I've got a drunk father and a failing orchard and no prospects. What man in his right mind would want any of that? Eli opened his mouth, then closed it. Because what could he say? That he wanted exactly that? That he'd spent 4 weeks falling for her strength and her stubbornness and the way she made terrible coffee every morning without apology? That pretending to be someone else so he could be near her was the best and worst decision he'd ever made? He couldn't say any of that. Not as Eli. Maybe not ever. So instead he said, "You're not plain. You're beautiful." Clara's head snapped up. Don't. Don't what? Don't lie to make me feel better. I've got a mirror, Eli. I know what I look like. So do I. And I'm not lying. Eli held her gaze. You're beautiful when you laugh. You're beautiful when you're elbow deep in a broken machine, figuring out how to fix it. You're beautiful when you're feeding chickens and cussing out the Duchess. You're beautiful because you're real. Tears spilled over, tracking down Clara's cheeks. She wiped at them angrily. Stop it. No. Eli. Any man who can't see what you're worth is an idiot, and you deserve better than idiots. Clara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You're impossible. I've been told that too. They sat there in the near dark, surrounded by photographs and unfinished quilts, and the weight of all the things neither of them could say. Finally, Clara stood, wiping her face on her sleeve. I should sleep, she said. Tomorrow's going to be long. Every day is long around here. True. She managed a weak smile. Thank you for all of this. Any time. Clara hesitated in the doorway. Eli, that promise you made about not interfering with my father. Yeah? If he ever actually hurts me, really hurts me, not just... She touched her cheek. If it gets worse, the promise is void. Understood? Something fierce and protective surged in Eli's chest. Understood. Clara nodded and disappeared upstairs. Eli let himself out, walked back to the barn, and lay awake for hours trying to figure out how to keep a woman safe when she didn't want to be kept anything except alone. The morning after found them back in the familiar rhythm of work, neither acknowledging what had been said in the sewing room. Clara moved through her tasks with the same determined efficiency, though Eli noticed she wore a scarf that covered the bruise on her cheek. When customers came by, she smiled and made small talk like nothing was wrong, like her father hadn't hit her in front of a witness less than 24 hours ago. Eli was learning that this was how Clara survived, by compartmentalizing, by putting pain in a box and moving forward anyway. It was practical. It was also slowly killing her. On Saturday, Clara mentioned she needed to go into town for supplies. Eli volunteered to handle the orchard work while she was gone, but she shook her head. I need you to come with me, she said. Some of the feed bags are too heavy for me to load alone. That was a lie. Eli had watched Clara hoist 100-pound sacks of grain like they weighed nothing, but he didn't argue. If Clara wanted company, he'd give it to her. The ride into Clover Ridge was quiet. Clara drove the wagon with steady hands, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Eli sat beside her, acutely aware of how close they were, how her shoulder occasionally brushed his when they hit a rut. He was also aware that this was dangerous territory. Clover Ridge was where people knew Rhett Mercer, where someone might recognize him despite the rough clothes and weeks of physical labor that had changed his appearance. He kept his hat pulled low and his head down. The feed store was their first stop. Clara greeted the owner by name, discussed prices with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been doing this for years. Eli loaded bags into the wagon and tried to be invisible. "That your new help?" the store owner asked Clara, nodding toward Eli. "Yes, Eli Cooper. He's been doing good work. Looks familiar. You from around here, son?" Eli's heart kicked against his ribs. "No, sir. Been traveling mostly." "Huh. Must just have one of those faces." The owner marked something in his ledger. "You're treating Miss Clara right, I hope. She deserves someone reliable." "Doing my best, sir." They left before anyone could ask more questions. Clara was quiet as they moved on to the general store, the blacksmith, the pharmacy where she picked up some kind of liniment for her back. Eli carried packages and kept his mouth shut, hyper-aware of every person who looked at them, every conversation that might include his name. They were loading the last of the supplies when Eli heard a voice that made his blood freeze. "Mercer, I'll be damned!" Eli turned slowly. Samuel Garrett stood on the sidewalk, grinning like he'd just found a long-lost friend. Garrett owned a spread north of Rhett's ranch and had been trying to buy water rights for the past 3 years. They'd done business together, had drinks together. Garrett knew Rhett Mercer's face as well as his own. "I'm sorry," Eli said carefully. "I think you've got me confused with someone else." Garrett's grin faltered. "What? No, I'd know you anywhere. We had dinner just last month at the—" He stopped, eyes going from Eli to Clara and back again. Slowly, understanding dawned on his face. "Oh, I see." "You've got the wrong person," Eli repeated. "Right. Of course. My mistake." Garrett tipped his hat to Clara. "Ma'am." Then quieter, to Eli. "We should talk. Later." He walked away before Eli could respond, leaving a silence that felt like broken glass. Clara stood very still beside the wagon. "What was that about?" "I don't know. He's mistaken. He seemed pretty certain he knew you." "People see what they want to see." Eli climbed onto the wagon bench, not looking at her. "We should get back." The ride home was different from the ride in. Clara kept glancing at him, questions building behind her eyes. Eli stared straight ahead and prayed she wouldn't ask them. She waited until they were unloading supplies at the orchard. "Eli." "Yeah? That man called you Mercer. He was wrong." "Was he?" Clara set down the bag she'd been carrying. "Because you looked like you'd seen a ghost when he said your name, and you've never mentioned where you're actually from, or what you did before you showed up here, or why someone who can barely afford tobacco somehow knows how to talk like an educated man when he forgets to hide it." Eli's hand stilled on the feed sack. "Clara, I'm not stupid. I've been watching you for 5 weeks. The way you hold yourself. The things you know that a drifter shouldn't. The fact that you showed up right after my debts mysteriously got paid." Her voice was shaking now. "Who are you?" "I'm Eli Cooper." "That's a lie. It's the name I gave you." "That's not the same thing." Clara's composure finally cracked. "I trusted you. I let you into my home, my business, my life. And you've been lying to me this whole time?" "I never lied about the things that mattered." "Everything matters!" She was shouting now, something Eli had never heard her do. "You think you can just show up, pretend to be someone you're not, make me feel—" She stopped, breathing hard. "You need to leave." "Clara, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You're not who you said you were. That's all I need to know." She turned toward the house. "I want you gone by morning." "Go, Eli, or whoever you really are. Just go." She went inside and shut the door. Not slamming it, that would have been better somehow. Just closing it quietly, finally, like she was shutting him out of more than just her house. Eli stood in the yard as the sun set, trying to figure out how everything had fallen apart so fast. Then he did the only thing he could think of. He went into town to find Samuel Garrett and beg him to keep his mouth shut. Garrett was at the saloon, which was both predictable and unfortunate. The last thing Eli needed was this conversation happening in public. But he didn't have a choice. "We need to talk," Eli said, sliding into the chair across from Garrett. "Outside." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "This about the girl?" "This is about you keeping my name out of your mouth." "Easy, Mercer. I'm not looking to cause trouble." Garrett took a pull from his beer. "Though I've got to admit, I'm curious. What's one of the richest men in Texas doing playing farmhand for a failing orchard? That's none of your business. Fair enough, but if word gets out that Rhett Mercer is slumming it with the Whitmore girl, people are going to talk. They're going to wonder why. And they're going to come up with all kinds of interesting theories. Eli's jaw tightened. What do you want? Want? Nothing. But I could use a favor down the line. Those water rights we discussed. Done. Whatever you need. Just keep this quiet. Garrett studied him for a long moment. You're serious about her? It wasn't a question, but Eli answered anyway. Yes. Does she know who you are? She's figuring it out. And how's that going? She told me to leave. Garrett whistled low. That's rough, but probably deserved, if we're being honest. What were you thinking lying to her like that? I was thinking. Eli stopped. What had he been thinking? That he could prove something to himself? That he could find love without the complication of wealth? That Clara Whitmore represented some kind of test he needed to pass? I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. Well, you've made a hell of a mess. Garrett finished his beer. For what it's worth, I'll keep quiet. But Mercer, next time you decide to play pretend, maybe pick someone who isn't so far out of your social circle that the whole thing looks suspicious. There won't be a next time. Good, because that girl deserves better than whatever game you're playing. Eli left before he said something he'd regret. Garrett was right. Clara did deserve better. Better than lies. Better than some rich man's experiment in humility. Better than him. He rode back to the orchard in the dark, unsure what he was going to say, but knowing he had to try. The barn was exactly as he'd left it, his few possessions still on the cot, the lantern still burning. Clara hadn't thrown his things out yet. That had to mean something. He walked to the house, knocked on the door. No answer. He tried again. Clara, I know you don't want to talk to me, but please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Silence. Then from inside, the door's unlocked. Eli let himself in. Clara sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her. She looked exhausted. In her hand was a piece of paper that made Eli's stomach drop. A letter, addressed to Mr. Rhett Mercer in care of the Clover Ridge post office. I went looking for answers, Clara said quietly. Asked around about who might have paid my debts. Eventually someone mentioned that Jonas Pike had been asking questions about the orchard on behalf of a client. It took some pushing, but I got him to admit the client was you. She set the letter down. Rhett Mercer, one of the richest cattle barons in 3 territories, owner of the largest ranch in Texas, and apparently a very good liar. Eli, Rhett, sat down across from her. I can explain. I'm listening. I saw you at the autumn market. Saw your father humiliate you. Saw everyone just walk away. The words came slowly, carefully. And I started thinking about my own life, about how lonely I was, about how everyone who smiled at me wanted something, my money, my connections, my name. I wondered if anyone could ever love me just for who I was, without all that weight attached. Clara's expression didn't change. So you decided to run an experiment? No. Yes, I don't know. Rhett ran his hands through his hair. I wanted to find out if real love existed, if someone could care about me when I had nothing to offer except work and company. And you picked me because I was desperate enough to accept anyone? I picked you because you were the strongest person I'd ever seen, because you'd been knocked down and kept getting up, because when I looked at you, I saw someone real. He met her eyes. I came here planning to stay a few weeks and leave, but then I got to know you, the way you work, the way you think, the way you make terrible coffee and pretend it's good. And somewhere in all that, I stopped caring about the experiment and started caring about you. Clara was quiet for a long moment. You lied to me for over a month. Yes? You let me pay you wages I could barely afford when you're probably richer than everyone in this town combined. Yes. You watched me struggle, watched my father hurt me, watched me worry about money and failure and losing everything my mother built, and you said nothing. I wanted to tell you, every day I wanted to tell you, but you didn't. Clara's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. You know what the worst part is? I was starting to trust you, starting to think maybe I wasn't as alone as I'd always been, and it was all based on a lie. Not all of it. My feelings for you are real. How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to believe anything you say? She stood, walking to the window. You're Rhett Mercer. You could have anyone. Any of those beautiful, refined women I've seen at the society events. Women who fit your world. Why would you possibly want someone like me? Because those women don't see me. They see the ranch, the money, the status. You saw Eli, clumsy, incompetent, broke Eli, and you gave him a chance anyway. You taught him, laughed at him, trusted him with your home. Rhett stood too, but didn't move closer. You made me feel useful for the first time in my life, like I mattered because of what I did, not what I owned. Clara's shoulders hunched. That's not fair. What's not fair? Using my loneliness against me like that, making me care about someone who doesn't even exist. Eli exists. He's just one version of me, the version I wish I could be all the time. But you're not Eli. You're Rhett Mercer. And Rhett Mercer lives in a 14-room house and owns 12,000 acres and has a mother who would die before letting him marry an orchard girl with a drunk father and no prospects. That stung because it was probably true. Rhett's mother had very specific ideas about appropriate matches. Clara wouldn't even make the list. I don't care what my mother thinks, Rhett said. Yes, you do. People like you always do. Clara turned to face him. This was never going to work. Even if you hadn't lied. Even if you'd shown up as yourself and somehow decided you wanted me anyway. We're from different worlds. You know it. I know it. Everyone in this town would know it. So what are you saying? I'm saying you should leave. Go back to your real life, find someone suitable, and let me get back to managing on my own. I don't want to leave. Well, I want you to. I need you to. Clara's voice finally broke. Because every time I look at you now, I'm going to remember that I fell for someone who doesn't exist, and I can't live with that reminder every day. Rhett felt something crack in his chest. Clara, please, just go. There was nothing else to say. Rhett nodded once, turned, and walked out before he did something stupid like beg. He gathered his things from the barn, didn't take long since he'd arrived with almost nothing, and saddled the borrowed horse. The sun was just starting to rise when he rode away from the Whitmore orchard for what he assumed would be the last time. He made it maybe 3 miles before he had to stop and sit on the side of the road, head in his hands, trying to process the fact that he'd found exactly what he'd been looking for and destroyed it through his own stupidity. The next week was the worst of Rhett's life, and that included the year his father died and left him an empire he didn't know how to run. He went back to his ranch, his house, his name. His foreman took one look at him and wisely asked no questions. His mother sent a telegram asking when he'd be visiting Dallas. He ignored it. Jonas Pike showed up with paperwork about property investments. Rhett signed without reading any of it. At night, he sat in his empty dining room and thought about terrible coffee and chickens named after royalty and the way Clara's face looked in the early morning light when she didn't know he was watching. On the 8th day, he broke. He'd been trying to give Clara space, trying to respect her wishes. But sitting alone in his big house, surrounded by everything money could buy, and none of what mattered, Rhett realized something important. He'd spent 5 weeks living as Eli Cooper, proving that someone could love him without his wealth. But he'd never actually asked the real question, whether he could love someone enough to risk everything for them. Clara had asked that question every single day. She risked her pride hiring him, risked her safety standing up to her father, risked her heart trusting someone who turned out to be a liar. And when she found out the truth, she hadn't asked him for anything except honesty. Rhett had given her lies instead. It was time to fix that. He rode back to the orchard at dawn, his heart hammering. The place looked the same, weathered barn, tired house, trees standing guard against the November cold, but something felt different, emptier. Clara was in the yard, struggling with a fence post that clearly required 2 people to set properly. She saw him coming and straightened, her expression going carefully blank. I told you to leave, she said. I did. I came back. Rhett dismounted. I'm not here as Eli. I'm here as myself, and I need to tell you something. I don't want to hear it. I know, but I need to say it anyway. He took a breath. You were right about everything. I lied to you. I used your loneliness. I made you care about someone who was only half real, and I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I know how to express. Clara crossed her arms. That's it? That's your big speech? No. The rest is this. I came here thinking I needed to prove something about love and wealth and whether people could see past money to the person underneath. But the real question was never whether you could love me. It was whether I was brave enough to love you the way you deserve, completely, honestly, without hiding behind disguises or half-truths. And are you brave enough? I don't know, Red admitted, but I want to find out. With you, if you'll let me. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. You hurt me. I know. You made me feel like an idiot for trusting you. I know. And now you're asking me to trust you again? Yes, but this time I'm asking as Rhett. No disguises, no games, just me, as I actually am, flawed and lonely and completely in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Claire's expression shifted through surprise, disbelief, and something that might have been hope before settling back into caution. You don't love me, she said. You love the idea of me, the strong, independent woman who didn't care about your money. But that's not a person. That's a character in your story. You're wrong. I love the way you hum while you work. I love that you name your chickens after royalty and your rooster after a Roman traitor. I love that you make terrible coffee and refuse to admit it. I love that you fixed my mistakes without making me feel worthless. I love that you stood up to your father even though you were scared. I love... Stop. Clara held up a hand. Just stop. Rhett stopped. Clara walked past him, toward the barn. For a horrible second, he thought she was getting a gun to shoot him. Instead, she emerged with a battered leather collar and a piece of rope. You want to prove you're serious? She said. There's a dog 3 towns over. My father sold him 4 years ago when I couldn't afford to feed both of us through a bad winter. His name is Bear. He was my mother's dog originally, the only thing I had left of her besides this orchard. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook on the rope. If you can find him and bring him home, I'll believe you mean what you say. Clara, that's my condition. That's the only way I'm willing to even consider trusting you again. She looked at him with those brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for a week. Can you do that? Or is this just another game? Rhett took the collar. It was worn soft, the leather cracked with age. I'll find him. You don't even know where to start. I'll figure it out. He climbed back on his horse. I'll bring him home, Clara. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. Rhett rode away before she could argue, the collar tucked safely in his coat pocket, already making a list of every person he'd need to talk to, every favor he'd need to call in. Clara had asked for proof. He'd give her proof. It took 3 days of searching, 3 days of riding to neighboring towns, asking about a large mixed-breed dog sold 4 years ago. 3 days of dead ends and false leads and growing certainty that he'd never find one specific dog in all of Texas territory. On the 3rd day, he found himself in a town called Millbrook, talking to a livery owner who remembered buying a dog from a drunk man about 4 years back. Big thing, protective as hell, the man said. Kept him for a while, but he was too much for the horses. Sold him to a widow woman who needed protection. Lives about 5 miles north, last house before the creek. Rhett found the house just before sunset. An older woman answered his knock, looked him over with sharp eyes. Help you? She asked. I'm looking for a dog. Big, maybe part shepherd. Would have been sold to you about 4 years ago. The woman's expression hardened. What do you want with Bear? Rhett's heart kicked. That's his name? Was when I got him. Why? He belonged to a friend of mine. Her father sold him without permission. She's been grieving him for 4 years. Rhett met the woman's eyes. I want to bring him home to her. How do I know you're telling the truth? Rhett pulled out the collar. She gave me this, said it was her mother's. The woman took the collar, examined it. Her expression softened. Bear's been good to me, keeps me safe. I'm not just handing him over to a stranger. I understand, but he's not mine to keep. He's hers, always has been. The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she called out, Bear, come here, boy. A dog emerged from behind the house. Huge, shaggy, with intelligent eyes and gray in his muzzle. He looked at Rhett with mild interest, then sat at the woman's feet. He won't go with you, the woman said. He doesn't know you. No, but he'll know her. Rhett knelt down, held out the collar. Can I? The woman nodded. Rhett fastened the old collar around Bear's neck. The dog sniffed it, went still. Then he looked at Rhett with what seemed like new recognition, tail starting to wag. "He remembers," the woman said quietly. "Where is she? The girl who lost him?" "Whitmore Orchard, about 30 miles south." "That's a long walk for an old dog. I'll carry him if I have to." The woman smiled for the first time. "You love her?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then take him, but you treat both of them right, understand? Dog and girl." "I will, I promise." Rhett rode back to the orchard with Bear trotting alongside his horse, the old dog keeping pace despite his age. They traveled through the night, arriving at the Whitmore property just as the sun was rising. Clara was already awake, working in the yard. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, her expression going from guarded to frozen as she registered what she was seeing. "Bear?" The word came out like a prayer. The dog's ears pricked forward. He stared at Clara, tail starting to move uncertainly. Then she called his name again. "Bear!" And the dog exploded into motion. He hit Clara at a full run, nearly knocking her over. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him, and the sound she made, half laugh, half sob, broke something in Rhett's chest and put it back together simultaneously. Bear whined and licked her face and wiggled like a puppy despite being old and gray. Clara buried her face in his fur and cried the way she probably hadn't let herself cry in years. Rhett stayed on his horse, giving them space, watching the woman he loved get back a piece of her mother she'd thought was lost forever. Eventually, Clara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "How?" "Asked around, found the woman who bought him, convinced her he belonged with you." Rhett dismounted. "He's older now, moves slower, but he remembered the collar." "You found him." Clara's voice was full of wonder. "You actually found him." "I told you I would." Clara stood, one hand still in Bear's fur, and looked at Rhett like she was seeing him for the first time. Not Eli the drifter, not Rhett the cattle baron, just him, exactly as he was. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're welcome." They stood there in the morning light, the distance between them feeling both infinite and non-existent. Finally, Clara spoke. "I don't know if I can trust you yet." "I know. And I'm still angry about the lying." "You should be." "But you found Bear." She looked down at the dog who was leaning against her leg like he'd never left. "That's not nothing." "No, it's not." Clara took a shaky breath. "If you want to earn my trust, the real thing, not the version I gave Eli, you're going to have to work for it. I'll do whatever it takes. Good, because I'm going to make you earn every inch." She met his eyes. "Starting with pressing cider. You still do it wrong, even after 6 weeks." Rhett felt something unknot in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door opening instead of slamming shut. "I can live with that. We'll see if you still feel that way in a month." Clara turned toward the barn. "Come on. Work starts at dawn." "It's already past dawn." "Then you're late." Rhett followed her into the barn, Bear trotting between them, and for the first time in a week, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he hadn't destroyed everything after all. The next 3 weeks were harder than the first 6 combined, but for entirely different reasons. Clara didn't make things easy. She'd warned him she wouldn't, and she kept that promise with a stubborn determination that would have been admirable if it wasn't so exhausting. She questioned everything, every decision Rhett made, every suggestion he offered, every moment of familiarity that slipped through his careful guard. When he mentioned knowing a better technique for pruning, something he'd learned from his own orchard manager, she asked how a drifter would know that. When he automatically reached for the expensive tools instead of the makeshift ones, she pointed it out. When he forgot to wince at the cold the way someone without proper winter clothes should, she noticed. "You're slipping," she said one morning, watching him work without gloves in temperatures that should have frozen his fingers solid. Eli Cooper would be complaining by now. Rhett looked down at his bare hands, then back at her. "I'm not trying to be Eli anymore." "No, you're trying to be someone in between, someone who works like a ranch hand but thinks like a cattle baron." Clara handed him a pair of worn gloves. "I don't know who that person is yet." "Neither do I," Rhett admitted, taking the gloves. "I'm figuring it out as I go." "Well, figure it out faster. I don't have time to train 2 different people." But despite her sharp words, Clara let him stay. Let him work beside her in the orchard, help repair the equipment she couldn't fix alone, take on the tasks that required strength she wouldn't admit she sometimes lacked. And slowly, so slowly Rhett almost didn't notice it happening, she started trusting him again with small things. She let him handle the money when customers came, let him make decisions about which trees to prune first, let him cook breakfast one morning when she overslept and only complained a little about the burnt eggs. And every evening, when the work was done, they'd sit on the porch with Bear between them and talk about nothing important. Weather, crops, the chicken's ongoing war against the rooster. They didn't talk about the future, didn't talk about what happened when winter came and the work ran out, didn't talk about the fact that Rhett owned a ranch that needed running or that Clara's father would eventually show up again. They existed in a strange, fragile present that felt both temporary and essential. On the 23rd day, Howard returned. Rhett saw him coming up the road and immediately went to find Clara. She was in the processing barn, checking the last of the cider stores before the first real freeze hit. "Your father's here," Rhett said. Clara's hand stilled on the barrel she'd been examining. "Is he drunk?" "Can't tell yet, but we should assume yes." "We?" Clara looked at him. "You promised you wouldn't interfere." "I promised I wouldn't interfere unless he actually hurt you. I'm hoping it won't come to that." Hoping doesn't change anything. But Clara straightened her shoulders and walked out to meet Howard anyway. Rhett followed at a distance, close enough to intervene, but far enough to let Clara handle it her way. Howard looked worse than the last time. Thinner, meaner, with the kind of desperation that came from running out of money and options. He swayed in his saddle, barely staying upright. "I need money," he announced without preamble. "I don't have any to give you," Clara said. "Don't lie to me. I know someone paid your debts. That means you've got cash sitting around." Howard's eyes were bloodshot, unfocused. "I'm your father. You owe me." "I don't owe you anything." "The hell you don't. I fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head." "With Ma's money. With the orchard she built." Clara's voice stayed level. "You haven't contributed anything to this place in 4 years except problems." Howard's face went purple. He started to dismount, stumbled, caught himself on the saddle. "You ungrateful bitch! After everything I sacrificed—" "You didn't sacrifice anything. You gave up. There's a difference." "I'm your father!" "Then act like it." The words exploded out of Clara with years of accumulated frustration behind them. "Act like someone who cares about more than his next drink. Act like the man Ma married instead of the stranger who replaced him." Howard froze. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Grief, maybe, or the ghost of the person he used to be. Then it was gone, replaced by familiar anger. "You want me to act like a father? Fine. I'm selling the orchard." Clara went very still. "What?" "You heard me. This place is in my name, has been since your mother died. And I'm selling it to Dalton. He's offered good money, enough to set me up comfortable for the rest of my life." "You can't do that. Watch me." Howard pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Already signed the preliminary agreement. We close in 30 days, unless you can buy me out." He named a figure that made Rhett's stomach clench. It wasn't impossible, for someone like Rhett Mercer. But for Clara, who barely cleared expenses on a good month, it might as well have been $1 million. "I don't have that kind of money," Clara said quietly. "Then I guess you'd better start packing." Howard shoved the paper at her. 30 days, Clara. Find the money or find somewhere else to live." He rode away before she could respond, leaving Clara standing in the yard holding a piece of paper that represented the end of everything she'd fought to preserve. Rhett stepped forward. "Clara, don't." She held up a hand, still staring at the document. "Just don't." "I can help. I have the money." "No. Clara, please, let me—" "I said no." She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. "I won't take your charity. I won't become another one of your projects. I'd rather lose the orchard than owe you for saving it." "It's not charity. It's you trying to fix things with money because that's what you know how to do. But some things can't be fixed that way." Clara folded the paper carefully. "I need to be alone right now." "Clara, please, Rhett, just go." She walked into the house and shut the door. This time she locked it. Rhett stood in the yard, useless and furious, while Bear whined at the closed door. He wanted to break it down, force Clara to listen, make her understand that accepting help wasn't weakness. But he'd spent weeks earning back her trust, and steamrolling her boundaries would destroy that in seconds. So instead, he did the only thing he could think of. He went to find Jonas Pike. Pike was at the bank, naturally, going through ledgers with the focused attention of someone who genuinely enjoyed numbers. He looked up when Rhett walked in. "Mercer? Twice in 2 months. I'm starting to think you actually like me." "I need information," Rhett said. "Howard Whitmore's selling the orchard to Dalton. What do you know about it?" Pike's expression sobered. "Nothing good. Dalton's been trying to buy that land for years. It's positioned perfectly for a railroad spur extension. If he gets it, he can negotiate deals with 3 different lines. Make a fortune in access fees alone." "And Howard doesn't know that?" "Howard's too drunk to read a map. He just knows Dalton's offering twice what the land's worth for farming. He thinks he's getting a great deal." Pike set down his pen. "What's your interest in this? Clara can't lose that orchard." "Sentimental about it now, are we?" "Something like that." Pike studied him. "You could buy it yourself. Outbid Dalton easily. Give Clara however long she needs to pay you back." "She won't accept my money. She's made that clear." "Then she's going to lose her home." Pike leaned back in his chair. "Unless you can come up with a solution that doesn't involve your wallet, there's not much you can do." Rhett left the bank with a plan forming, not a good plan, but the only one he could think of that didn't involve directly giving Clara money she'd refuse. He rode to Dalton's property, found the man in his study reviewing contracts. "Mercer," Dalton said, surprised. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I want to talk about the Whitmore orchard." Dalton's expression shifted to calculated interest. "What about it?" "I know why you want it. Railroad access. You're not buying an orchard, you're buying a position." "Smart man. So?" "So I'll buy it from you. Whatever you're paying Howard plus 20%. You walk away, I take ownership." "And then what? You give it back to the girl?" Dalton shook his head. "No deal. I've been working on acquiring that land for 3 years. I'm not giving it up for a quick profit." 30%. "Not interested." 40. Dalton smiled. "You're desperate. That's interesting. Why do you care so much about one failing orchard?" Rhett didn't answer. "Ah," Dalton said. "The girl. You're in love with her." He laughed. "That's rich. Rhett Mercer falling for a plain spinster with a drunk father. Your mother must be thrilled. Do we have a deal or not?" "No, because whatever you're willing to pay, the railroad position is worth more long term." Dalton stood. "Tell you what, though, since I'm feeling generous. If Clara wants to stay on the property after I take ownership, I could use an orchard manager. She can rent the house, work the land, give me a percentage of profits. She'd essentially be a tenant on her own mother's property, but at least she wouldn't be homeless." The offer was designed to humiliate, to take everything Clara had built and turn her into an employee on land that should have been her inheritance. Rhett wanted to put his fist through Dalton's smug face. "I'll take that as a no," Rhett said. "Suit yourself. But the deal with Howard goes through in 30 days regardless. If Clara's got the money to buy him out, great. If not, the land is mine." Dalton returned to his contracts. "Doors behind you." Rhett rode back to the orchard feeling like a failure. He had money, connections, resources that could solve this problem in an afternoon, but none of it mattered if Clara wouldn't let him use it, and forcing the issue would only prove what she already suspected, that he still thought money could fix everything. When he arrived back, Clara was in the barn with Bear, brushing the old dog with slow mechanical movements. She didn't look up when Rhett entered. "I tried talking to Dalton," he said, "offered to buy the land from him. I told you not to interfere." "I know. I did it anyway." "And?" "He's not interested in selling. He wants the railroad position too badly." Clara's hand stilled on the brush. "So that's it then. 30 days and I lose everything Ma built." "Not necessarily. We could—" "There's no we in this, Rhett. This is my problem." "It doesn't have to be. If you just let me—" "What?" "Buy the orchard myself, pay off my father, solve all my problems with money I didn't earn?" Clara finally looked at him. "That's not help. That's rescue. And I don't need rescuing." "Everyone needs help sometimes. Not your kind of help. Not help that comes with strings attached." "There are no strings." "There are always strings. Maybe you don't see them, but they're there." Clara set down the brush. "If you pay off my father, I owe you. If you buy the orchard, I owe you. If you solve this problem, I spend the rest of my life wondering if you think I'm weak. Wondering if you're staying because you want to or because you feel responsible for the charity case you created." "That's not fair, isn't it? You've spent 7 weeks trying to prove you're different from other rich men. But the second things get hard, your first instinct is to throw money at the problem. That's exactly what someone like you would do. The words hit harder than any slap. Because Clara was right. His first instinct had been money. His second instinct had been money. He tried negotiating, bribing, buying his way to a solution without ever stopping to ask what Clara actually needed. "I'm sorry," Rhett said. "You're right. I'm not helping. I'm making it worse." Clara looked surprised. "I didn't expect you to admit that." "Yeah, well, I'm learning." Rhett sat down on a hay bale. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. I've been sitting here trying to figure that out." Clara pulled her knees up to her chest. "I could try to raise the money, sell everything that isn't nailed down, take out loans, work every hour of every day for a month. You'd still come up short, probably, but at least I'd have tried." She rested her chin on her knees. "The alternative is watching Dalton take everything and offering me a job managing my own mother's land like some kind of employee, which I think might actually kill me." They sat in silence for a while, Bear settling between them with a contented sigh. The old dog had adjusted quickly to being home, like the 4 years away had been a bad dream. Rhett found himself envying that, the ability to just accept where you were and be grateful for it. "There might be another option," Rhett said slowly, "but you're going to hate it." "I already hate all the options. Tell me." "Your father needs the money to feel secure. Dalton wants the land for railroad access. What if we gave them both something different?" Rhett met Clara's eyes. "What if we got married?" Clara stared at him. "What? Hear me out. If we're married, your father can't sell the property without your consent. Texas property law gives wives rights to marital assets. We could argue in court that the orchard is a marital asset since you've been running it. At minimum, it would delay the sale long enough to figure out other options." "That's insane. It's practical. It's using marriage as a legal maneuver. It's using marriage as a solution to a problem. People have done it for less worthy reasons." Rhett leaned forward. "Think about it, Clara. Your father loses his leverage. Dalton loses his easy acquisition. You keep the orchard, and we buy time to find a better long-term solution. And what happens to us in this arrangement? Do we just stay married out of legal convenience? We could, or we could make it real." Rhett's voice gentled. "I love you. I've loved you since the second week when you laughed at me for getting stuck in the apple press. I'd marry you tomorrow for no reason except wanting to spend the rest of my life with you. If it also happens to solve a property dispute, that's just a bonus." Clara's expression was unreadable. "You're proposing marriage to save my orchard. I'm proposing marriage because I want to marry you. The orchard is just good timing. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "Have you had others?" "No, but I've imagined better ones." Clara stood, brushing hay off her dress. "I need to think." "How long?" "I don't know. Not long. We only have 30 days. But I need time to figure out if I'm considering this because it's actually what I want, or because I'm desperate." She looked at him. "You understand that, right?" "I understand. And if I say no, you'll respect that?" "If you say no, I'll respect it. But I'm still going to find another way to help." "Even if I tell you not to?" Rhett smiled slightly. "I said I'd respect your decision. I didn't say I'd stop trying to help. I'm learning, Clara, but I'm not a saint." That surprised a laugh out of her, short and startled, but genuine. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." Clara left him in the barn, and Rhett sat there with Bear for a long time, wondering if he'd just made the situation better or catastrophically worse. Proposing marriage as a legal strategy was possibly the least romantic thing he'd ever done. But it was also the only solution he could think of that didn't involve directly paying Clara's debts. 3 days later, Howard showed up again. This time he was sober, which somehow made him more dangerous. Sober Howard was calculating, mean, and capable of long-term planning in ways drunk Howard wasn't. "I've been thinking about our situation," Howard said, standing in the yard like he owned it, which, technically, he did. "And I've decided to be generous." Clara crossed her arms. "Generous how?" "You can stay after the sale. Dalton said he'd hire you as orchard manager. You'd have a job, a place to live. All you have to do is accept that this land isn't yours anymore." "And if I don't accept that?" "Then you leave with nothing." Howard's voice was flat. "Your choice. But make it fast. Deal closes in 27 days. "Actually," a voice said from behind them, "the deal might not close at all. Rhett emerged from the barn, and Howard's face immediately twisted into a sneer. The drifter. Still here, I see. Clara must be paying you in something other than money. Clara's face flushed with anger, but Rhett spoke before she could. I'm not here as a worker anymore. I'm here as Clara's fiancé. The word dropped into the yard like a stone into still water. Howard blinked. Her what? Fiancé. We're getting married. Rhett moved to stand beside Clara, not quite touching, but close enough to make the point. Which means the orchard becomes a marital asset. Which means you can't sell it without both our consent. That's horseshit. You can't just... Actually, I can. Texas property law is very clear on this. Rhett kept his voice level. We're getting married next week. After that, any sale of this property requires my signature as well as Clara's. And I'm not signing. Howard looked between them, calculating. You think I'm stupid? This is some kind of trick. It's not a trick. It's a legal marriage. Clara? Howard turned to his daughter. You're really going to marry this nobody just to spite me? Clara was very still beside Rhett. For a horrible second, he thought she might contradict him, call the whole thing off, choose losing the orchard over accepting his help. Then she reached out and took Rhett's hand. Yes, she said. I am. Howard's face went through several different expressions before landing on fury. You'll regret this, both of you. You think some quickie marriage is going to stop me from getting what's owed? I'll fight this in court. I'll drag both of you through every legal proceeding I can find. And when I'm done, you'll wish you'd just taken Dalton's offer. Do what you need to do, Clara said. But you're not selling this land without a fight. Howard spat at their feet and stormed off, mounting his horse with jerky, angry movements. He rode away without looking back, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. The second he was out of sight, Clara dropped Rhett's hand. What the hell was that? She demanded. A solution. I hadn't agreed to anything yet. I know. I'm sorry. But he was standing there giving you an ultimatum, and I couldn't just... Rhett stopped. I'm sorry. I should have waited for your decision. Clara paced away, then back. You just told my father we're getting married. Next week. I did. Without asking me. I know. And now if I say no, it looks like I was lying, like this whole thing was a bluff. Clara pressed her hands to her temples. You backed me into a corner. I gave you an out. If you want to say this was my idea, that I pressured you, that you never agreed, I'll take the blame. Your father will think I'm crazy and you'll be free to make your own choice. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You mean that? Yes. You'd let me humiliate you in front of the whole town just to give me a choice. It's not humiliation if it's true. I did pressure you. I did back you into a corner. Rhett met her eyes. I meant what I said about loving you, about wanting to marry you for real, not just as a legal maneuver. But I can't force you into it. So if you want out, I'll give you out. Clara was quiet for so long that Rhett started mentally preparing his apology speech to the entire town. Then she spoke. What if we did it? Did what? Got married, for real. Clara's voice was uncertain but steady. Not as a trick or a legal strategy, as an actual marriage. Rhett's heart stuttered. Are you sure? No, I'm terrified. You're Rhett Mercer and I'm nobody. Your mother is going to hate me. Society is going to tear me apart. And I still don't completely trust that you're not going to wake up one day and realize you made a terrible mistake. Clara took a shaky breath. But I love you. I've been trying not to, but I do. And if we're going to do this thing anyway to save the orchard, we might as well do it honestly. That's also a terrible acceptance of a proposal. Matches your terrible proposal. Fair point. Rhett stepped closer. So we're doing this? Actually doing this? I guess we are. Clara looked up at him. But we're doing it my way. No fancy society wedding, no announcement in the papers, just us and a judge and whatever legal requirements we need to make it binding. Whatever you want. And afterward we tell people the truth, that we got married because we wanted to, not because of my father or the orchard or any kind of scheme. Agreed. Clara nodded once, decisive. Okay. Then let's get married next week before I lose my nerve. Rhett wanted to kiss her, wanted to pick her up and spin her around and celebrate the fact that this impossible, wonderful woman had just agreed to spend her life with him. But Clara was still holding herself carefully, like she might shatter if handled wrong, so instead he just took her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. You might regret it when you realize what you're signing up for." "Not possible," says the man who's never had to deal with me when I'm really angry. But Clara was smiling slightly. "Come on, we should probably figure out the actual logistics of this thing before my father comes back with a lawyer." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Practical, unglamorous plans about licenses and witnesses and how to structure the marriage legally so it would hold up in court. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't the kind of wedding either of them had probably imagined, but it was real and honest and built on something stronger than just love. It was built on choice. 7 days later, they stood in front of a judge in Clover Ridge with Jonas Pike and the judge's wife as witnesses. Clara wore her best dress, still worn, still mended, but clean. Rhett wore actual Rhett Mercer clothes for the first time in weeks, and Clara had stared at him for a full minute when she saw him. "What?" he'd asked. "Nothing, just, you clean up nice. So do you." "I'm wearing the same dress I always wear." "I know, that's what makes it nice." The ceremony took maybe 10 minutes. The judge asked if they'd come freely and of sound mind. They both said yes. He asked if they promised to honor the commitment they were making. They both said yes again. He pronounced them married, and that was it. No grand celebration, no throwing rice, no reception with champagne and dancing. Just two people standing in a courthouse, holding hands, legally binding their lives together for reasons that were equal parts practical and emotional. Pike shook Rhett's hand afterward. "Congratulations, I think." "You think?" "Well, you've either made the best decision of your life or you're about to discover why people usually date for longer than 2 months before getting married." Pike glanced at Clara, who was signing the marriage certificate with fierce concentration. "But for what it's worth, I hope it works out. She deserves someone who sees what she's worth." "I know what she's worth," Rhett said. "Then don't forget it, because that woman will leave you in a heartbeat if you prove you don't." They rode back to the orchard in Clara's wagon, legally married and completely uncertain what came next. The property issue was temporarily solved. Howard couldn't sell without both their signatures now. But that just bought time. It didn't fix the underlying problem of Howard's drinking or Dalton's ambition or the fact that Clara and Rhett were now bound together by law, whether or not they figured out how to actually be married. "So," Clara said as they pulled into the yard, "what now?" "Now we tell your father. Make it official." "He's going to be furious." "Let him be furious. He can't do anything about it." Clara nodded, but she looked anxious. "And after that?" "After that, we figure it out as we go." Rhett helped her down from the wagon. "One day at a time." "That's not much of a plan." "No, but it's honest." Clara looked at him, at the orchard, at Bear waiting patiently on the porch. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Me too." "Good. At least we're scared together." She took his hand. "Come on, husband. Let's go tell my father his plan failed." They walked toward the house together, married and terrified and completely committed to figuring out how to make this impossible thing work. Howard showed up 3 days after the wedding with a lawyer in tow and rage written across his face. Clara and Rhett were repairing fence posts when the two men rode into the yard, and something about the lawyer's expensive coat told Rhett this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "You think you're clever," Howard said, not bothering with greetings. "Getting married to block the sale. But my attorney here says we've got options." The lawyer, a thin man named Pritchard with the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled, pulled out a sheaf of papers. The marriage was conducted in obvious bad faith, a transparent attempt to circumvent a legal property transaction. We'll be filing to have it annulled on grounds of fraud. Clara's grip tightened on the fence post. "It's not fraud. We got married because we wanted to. You got married 7 days after your father announced he was selling the property. The timing alone demonstrates intent to deceive." Pritchard's voice was dry, factual. "A judge will see through this easily." "Let them try," Rhett said. "We'll testify under oath that this marriage is legitimate, that we entered it freely and with genuine intent. You'll testify that you've known each other for what, 2 months? That you courted properly? That this wasn't a desperate attempt to maintain control of property that doesn't belong to either of you?" Pritchard looked between them. "I've seen marriages like this before. They don't hold up in court." Howard was watching Clara with cold satisfaction. "You should have just accepted Dalton's offer. Now you're going to lose everything and look like a fool doing it. I'd rather look like a fool than give you the satisfaction of destroying what Ma built." Clara's voice was steady, but Rhett could see her hands shaking. "Fight it in court if you want. We're not backing down." "Fine, we will." Howard turned his horse. "And when we win, and we will win, you'll owe court costs on top of everything else. Hope your new husband's got deep pockets." They rode off, leaving Clara and Rhett standing in a yard that suddenly felt a lot less secure than it had 10 minutes ago. "Can they actually do that?" Clara asked quietly. "Get it annulled?" "I don't know, maybe." Rhett set down the fence post he'd been holding. "But we knew this wouldn't be simple. I knew my father was mean. I didn't know he was smart enough to hire a lawyer who could make a real case." Clara sat down hard on the ground, like her legs had given out. "What if they win? What if the marriage gets annulled and we lose anyway? Then we figure out the next step." "There is no next step. This was the plan, the only plan." Clara put her head in her hands. "I'm going to lose the orchard, and you're going to be tied to a failed marriage that everyone knows was fake." Rhett sat down beside her. "It's not fake." "Tell that to Pritchard." "I will. In court, under oath, to anyone who asks." He waited until Clara looked at him. "I married you because I wanted to marry you. Everything else is just circumstances. That's not fraud. That's two people making the best of a bad situation. That's not exactly a romantic defense of our marriage." "No, but it's honest." Rhett reached for her hand. "We can fight this, Clara. We can hire our own lawyer, build a case, show the court that this marriage is real." "With what money? I can barely afford feed for the chickens. I can't afford lawyers." "I can." Clara pulled her hand away. "And there it is. Back to you solving everything with money. That's not fair, isn't it? Every problem we've had, your first solution is your wallet. Debts, pay them. Property dispute, buy the land. Legal trouble, hire lawyers." Clara stood, brushing dirt off her dress. "I can't build a marriage on your money, Rhett. I won't." "Then what do you want me to do? Stand by and watch you lose everything because you're too proud to accept help?" "I want you to trust that I can handle my own problems." "I do trust you, but that doesn't mean you have to handle everything alone." Rhett stood too, frustration bleeding into his voice. "We're married now. Your problems are my problems. That's how this works." "No. Your money is your money. My orchard is my orchard. Just because we signed some papers doesn't mean I'm entitled to your resources." "That's exactly what it means. That's literally what marriage is." They stood facing each other, both breathing hard, the argument hanging between them like smoke. Bear, sensing the tension, slunk toward the barn with his tail between his legs. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice quieter. "I watched my mother lose herself in marriage, watched her subsume everything she was into what my father needed. And when she died, there was nothing left of her except this orchard. I won't do that. I won't become an extension of you." "I'm not asking you to." "Yes, you are. Maybe not intentionally, but you are. Every time you solve a problem for me, you're saying I can't solve it myself. Every time you pay for something, you're saying my contribution isn't enough." Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I know you mean well. I know you're trying to help, but I need you to understand, if I can't stand on my own in this marriage, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if you stayed because you wanted to or because you felt obligated to the woman you rescued." The words hit Rhett like a physical blow, because underneath the argument about money was the real question Clara had been asking since the day she found out who he was. Did he love her, or did he love the idea of saving her? "I don't want to rescue you," Rhett said carefully. "I want to stand beside you. But I don't know how to do that when you won't let me help." "Then learn. Because I can't spend my life fighting both my father and my husband for the right to make my own decisions." She walked away before Rhett could respond, disappearing into the house and leaving him alone with the mess of their first real fight as a married couple. That night they slept on opposite sides of the bed they'd been sharing for 3 days, still figuring out the strange intimacy of marriage. Clara faced the wall. Rhett stared at the ceiling. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was so loud it drowned out everything else. The next morning, Rhett made a decision. He rode into town before dawn, found Jonas Pike's house, and knocked until the banker answered in his nightshirt, looking annoyed. "This better be important, Mercer. I need legal advice, not the kind you'd normally give." Rhett stepped inside without being invited. If Clara and I wanted to prove our marriage is legitimate, what would we need? Pike ran a hand through his sleep-mussed hair. Evidence of genuine relationship. Witnesses who can testify you courted properly. Documentation that this wasn't a sudden decision made only to block a property sale. We don't have most of that. Then you've got a problem. Pike moved toward the kitchen, apparently resigned to being awake. Howard's lawyer is going to argue that the marriage was contracted in bad faith. Unless you can prove otherwise with substantial evidence, the annulment will probably go through. What counts as substantial evidence? Letters, witnesses to a relationship that predates the property dispute, proof you were planning marriage before Howard announced the sale. Pike started making coffee with the resigned movements of someone who knew he wasn't going back to sleep. Do you have any of that? No, we kept everything quiet. Rhett paused. But people knew I was working at the orchard. They saw us together. Saw a ranch hand and his employer. That's not evidence of romance. Pike poured water into the pot. Look, I'm going to be blunt. Unless you can demonstrate that this marriage has substance beyond legal maneuvering, you're going to lose. And Clara's going to lose her home. Rhett sat at Pike's kitchen table while the coffee brewed, turning the problem over in his mind. Clara wouldn't let him pay for lawyers, wouldn't let him buy the property outright, wouldn't accept help that came from his wallet. But there had to be another way, something that used his resources without making her feel like charity. What if we didn't fight the annulment? Rhett said slowly. Pike looked at him like he'd lost his mind. What? What if we let the marriage be annulled but on our terms? We admit it was partly motivated by the property dispute, but we argue that we're staying together anyway because the relationship is real. That doesn't solve the property problem. No, but it removes the fraud accusation, and it gives Clara back her choice. Rhett stood, pacing Pike's small kitchen. She's right. I've been trying to fix everything with money, but what she needs isn't someone to solve her problems. She needs someone who trusts her to solve them herself. Noble sentiment doesn't save the orchard. Maybe it doesn't have to be saved. Maybe it has to be rebuilt. Rhett stopped pacing. Can you put together a list of every person in business Clara owes money to? Current debts, future obligations, everything? Why? Because I'm going to make her a business proposal, not a rescue, a partnership. Rhett's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. She keeps saying she won't take my charity. Fine, I won't offer charity. I'll offer investment. Pike studied him over his coffee cup. You're serious about her? Yes. And you understand that if this doesn't work, you'll have blown your fortune on a failing orchard and destroyed your marriage in the process? I understand. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Rhett headed for the door. Get me that list, and keep it quiet. I don't want Clara hearing about this until I'm ready. He spent the next 2 days working on a proposal that would have made his business manager weep. Not a bailout, not charity, a genuine investment structure that treated the orchard like any other business venture. Risk assessment, profit projections, partnership terms that gave Clara control while allowing Rhett to contribute capital. When he finally showed it to Clara, she read through it twice in complete silence. You want to invest in the orchard, she finally said. Yes, as a business partner. Yes. With a contract that gives me majority control and decision-making authority. Yes. Clara set down the papers. This is insane. The orchard barely breaks even. You'd be investing in a failing business with no guarantee of return. I'd be investing in you. That's all the guarantee I need. Rhett, listen. I've been thinking about what you said. About not wanting to be rescued. About needing to stand on your own. Rhett leaned forward. This isn't rescue. This is me betting on you the same way I'd bet on any venture I believed in. You keep control. You make the decisions. I just provide capital and support. And if it fails, then we tried. But I don't think it will fail, not with you running it. Clara was quiet for a long time, studying the contract like it might explode. There's a section here about profit sharing. Standard partnership structure. If the orchard turns profitable, we both benefit proportionally to our investment. You're putting in all the money. I'm putting in labor and land I don't technically own. You're putting in expertise and years of work building this business. That's worth as much as capital. Rhett pulled out another document. And there's this, a separate agreement about the property itself. Clara read it, her eyes widening. You want to buy the orchard from my father and lease it back to me? I want to buy it so he can't sell it to Dalton. Then lease it to you at rates you can actually afford, with an option to buy it back from me whenever you're ready. Rhett kept his voice steady. This way the land stays protected, your father gets his payout, and you maintain operational control. It's not charity, it's a business arrangement. It's you spending a fortune to solve my problem. It's me making an investment in a property I believe has value. The fact that it also solves your problem is just good business. Clara stood, walked to the window, came back. Let me get this straight. You want to invest in the orchard, buy the land from my father, lease it back to me, and give me majority control of everything. Yes. And you think this somehow isn't rescue? It's not rescue if you're the one running the business. If you're the one making decisions. If you have the power to tell me to go to hell if you don't like how I'm handling my role as investor. Rhett met her eyes. I'm not saving you, Clara. I'm betting on you. There's a difference. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his complete surprise, she started laughing. Not the bitter laugh he'd heard before, but something genuine and a little wild. You're absolutely insane, she said. I've been told. This could blow up in your face completely. The orchard could fail. I could fail. You could lose everything. I could, but I don't think I will. Clara shook her head, still half laughing. Your mother is going to kill you when she finds out you married an orchard girl and invested your fortune in apples. My mother doesn't get a vote in my life anymore. She's going to try anyway. Clara picked up the contract again, reading more carefully. These terms are actually fair. You're not trying to control everything. That's because I don't want to control everything. I want to support you in running the business you've already built. And the annulment? The lawyer? We tell them the truth. We got married partly because of the property dispute, but we're staying married because we want to be. If they annul it on technicality, fine. We'll just get married again properly. Rhett stood. I'm done letting other people dictate what our marriage means. We know it's real. That's all that matters. Clara set down the contract, walked over to him, and kissed him. It was the first time she'd initiated contact since the wedding, and Rhett felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. You're an idiot, she said against his mouth. Probably. And this plan is probably going to fail. Maybe. But it's the first time anyone's ever trusted me to actually run something instead of just trying to fix it for me. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. So yes, let's do it. Let's be business partners and marriage partners and figure out how to make both work. They sealed the partnership that afternoon with Jonas Pike as witness, then rode together to confront Howard with the new reality. Rhett had the money to buy the orchard outright at the price Dalton had offered. Howard could either sell to his son-in-law or spend the next year fighting a legal battle he'd probably lose. Howard chose the money. Of course he did. The transaction took 2 weeks to finalize. Paperwork, transfers, legal verification that everything was legitimate. Pritchard tried to object, but his case fell apart when it became clear the property sale was going through regardless of the marriage status. Dalton made a few threatening noises about interference and lost opportunities, but ultimately backed off when Rhett made it clear he wasn't interested in railroad negotiations. By December, the orchard legally belonged to Rhett Mercer, leased to Clara Mercer under terms that gave her operational control and a path to eventual ownership. Howard took his money and disappeared to Dallas, presumably to drink it away in more fashionable surroundings. And Clara and Rhett were left figuring out how to actually be married now that the crisis had passed. It wasn't easy. Clara still bristled when Rhett tried to help too much. Rhett still struggled with watching Clara work herself to exhaustion without stepping in. They fought about money, about decisions, about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. They were learning that loving someone and living with someone were two entirely different skills. But they were learning together. The first real test came when Rhett's mother showed up unannounced in January, stepping out of an expensive carriage and looking at the orchard like she'd just discovered a new species of poverty. "Rhett," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled horror. "We need to talk." Clara was in the yard when it happened, carrying a bag of feed that probably weighed more than Rhett's mother's jewelry box. She stopped when she saw the carriage, and Rhett watched her face go through several calculations before settling on polite neutrality. "Mother," Rhett said, "this is unexpected. I would imagine so, since you didn't bother telling me you got married." His mother's eyes cut to Clara, took in the work dress, the rough hands, the complete lack of social refinement. I had to hear about it from Jonas Pike when he wrote asking for verification of some property transfer. I was going to write. When? After your first anniversary? His mother's voice could have cut glass. You married some farmer's daughter without even introducing us first? I married Clara because I love her, Rhett said quietly. And I didn't introduce you because I knew you'd react exactly like this. Clara set down the feed bag. I'll give you some privacy. Stay, Rhett said. Then to his mother, anything you need to say, you can say in front of my wife. His mother's expression suggested she had plenty to say, none of it appropriate for polite company, but years of social training held. Fine. Perhaps we could discuss this inside, unless your new home doesn't have suitable accommodations. They went into the house, the small worn house, with its mended curtains and second-hand furniture. Rhett watched his mother take it all in with the kind of disdain only old money could produce. Clara put on coffee with calm efficiency, like entertaining disapproving in-laws was just another Tuesday chore. So, his mother said once they were seated, you've given up everything for this. I haven't given up anything. I've gained everything that matters. You've given up your position, your prospects, any hope of a suitable marriage. I have a suitable marriage, suitable for me. His mother's jaw tightened. Do you have any idea what people are saying? That you've lost your mind, that you've been taken advantage of by some opportunistic farm girl, that the Mercer name is being dragged through. I don't care what people are saying. Rhett's voice was flat. I care about Clara. I care about building a life that actually means something instead of playing society games that make everyone miserable. And what about children? What about legacy? You expect me to accept grandchildren raised in this, she gestured around the kitchen, this poverty? This isn't poverty, it's an honest life. Rhett leaned forward. I'm done pretending that wealth equals worth. Done measuring people by their bank accounts and family trees. Clara has more integrity in her little finger than most of your society friends have in their entire bodies. His mother turned to Clara. And you? I suppose you think you've made quite the catch. Rich husband, access to money and status you never would have achieved on your own. Clara, who'd been silent through the whole exchange, finally spoke. I think I married a man who showed up at my orchard pretending to be poor because he was lonely and wanted to know if anyone could love him for himself. I think he's still figuring out who he wants to be, and I'm helping him figure it out the same way he's helping me save my mother's legacy. She met Rhett's mother's eyes without flinching. And I think you're here because you're scared of losing your son to a life you don't understand. The kitchen went silent. Rhett's mother stared at Clara like she'd been slapped. That was presumptuous, his mother finally said. Maybe, but it's also true. Clara poured coffee, handed a cup to Rhett's mother with the same calm she'd used to handle every other crisis. You don't have to like me, Mrs. Mercer. You don't have to approve of this marriage. But Rhett's happy here, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep him that way. If that's not enough for you, then I'm sorry. But I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not just to make you comfortable. Rhett's mother took the coffee, her hands shaking slightly. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, surprisingly, his mother laughed, short and bitter, but genuine. You have more backbone than the girls I tried to set him up with, she said. Thank you? It wasn't a compliment, but I suppose it's not an insult either. His mother sipped her coffee, made a face at the taste, but didn't comment. I still think you're both making a mistake, but I can see you're committed to it. We are, Rhett said. His mother stood, setting down the barely touched coffee. I won't pretend to understand this, and I won't pretend I'm not disappointed. But you're my son, Rhett, and I suppose that means accepting your choices even when I think they're foolish. That's all I'm asking. She nodded stiffly, then looked at Clara. Take care of him. He's more fragile than he pretends. I know, Clara said. I will. Rhett walked his mother to her carriage, endured a brief, awkward embrace, and watched her leave without looking back. When he returned to the kitchen, Clara was washing the coffee cups. That went better than expected, Rhett said. She hates me. No, she hates the situation. She'll come around. And if she doesn't, then she doesn't. My life is here now. Rhett wrapped his arms around Clara from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. With you. With terrible coffee and chickens that want to kill me. with work that actually means something and a wife who won't let me get away with anything. Clara leaned back into him. Your mother called this poverty. She's wrong. Is she? Be honest. This is nothing like the life you had before. Thank goodness for that. Rhett turned Clara to face him. That life was empty. This one isn't. That's all that matters. Clara looked up at him, searching his face for doubt. You really mean that? I really do. Even when I make you muck stalls. Even then. Even when the orchard barely breaks even and we're eating beans for dinner. Even then. Clara smiled, the real smile, the one that transformed her whole face. You're an idiot. So you keep telling me, and I'm going to keep telling you, for the rest of our lives. I'm counting on it. They stood there in the small kitchen, holding each other while the winter sun slanted through the window and Bear snored on the rug. It wasn't the life Rhett had been raised to expect. It wasn't grand or impressive or the kind of thing that got written up in society columns. But it was real, and it was theirs. Spring came with new challenges, equipment that broke, trees that needed replacing, markets that paid less than hoped. But it also brought the wildflowers Rhett had planted months ago, transforming the orchard into something magical. Clara stood among them one morning, coffee in hand, and laughed when Rhett admitted what he'd done. You planted these? When I was still mad at you? When you were still deciding if you could trust me again, yes. You didn't know if I'd even let you stay. I knew. I had hope. Rhett picked one of the flowers, tucked it behind Clara's ear. Hope that you'd see past the lies to what was real underneath. Hope that we could build something worth keeping. Clara touched the flower, then his face. We did. We are, but the orchard didn't make them rich. Some seasons they struggled. Some decisions failed. They fought about money and work, and whether the rooster needed to be replaced with a less aggressive model. But they fought fair, and they fought together, and they built something that belonged to both of them equally. Rhett learned that having less didn't mean being less. That satisfaction came from work that mattered, not wealth that impressed. That he'd spent 34 years trying to fill an emptiness that only Clara, difficult, stubborn, remarkable Clara, could fill. Clara learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, that partnership didn't mean surrender, that the man who'd shown up pretending to be nobody had actually been trying to discover if he could be somebody worth loving without all the trappings he'd been taught defined his worth. And Bear, old and gray and content, spent his remaining years exactly where he belonged, on the porch of the orchard his first owner had built, watching over the woman who'd never stopped loving him and the man who'd crossed 3 territories to bring him home. On Sunday mornings, they'd sit together in the yard, drinking terrible coffee that neither of them would admit needed improvement, arguing about which section to harvest first, planning futures that included children who'd grow up learning that worth wasn't measured in acres owned but in character built. Bear would lean against Clara's leg, the chickens would wage war on the rooster, and Rhett would look at his life, small and simple, and utterly unlike the one he'd been raised to want, and feel completely, absolutely rich. Because he'd learned what his father's empire never taught him, that real wealth wasn't in the having, it was in the becoming, in choosing each day to be the kind of person who deserved the love of someone who saw past every wall, every disguise, every defense, to the frightened, lonely man underneath. Clara taught him that. The woman nobody else had wanted, who everyone undervalued, who kept standing back up every time life knocked her down. She taught him that strength wasn't in never falling, it was in getting up anyway. That dignity wasn't given by social position, it was built through honest work and honest choice. And Rhett taught her something too, though it took longer for Clara to accept the lesson, that being loved didn't require being perfect. That vulnerability wasn't failure. That letting someone stand beside you wasn't the same as being weak. They taught each other, challenged each other, occasionally drove each other completely insane, but they kept choosing each other day after day, season after season. Through success and failure and everything in between, the orchard survived. Eventually, it did better than survive. Clara's hard work combined with Rhett's business sense created something neither could have built alone. A thriving business that employed local families, produced quality cider that developed a regional reputation, and became known as the place where that rich cattle baron had given up everything for love. Rhett never corrected that story. Let people think he'd sacrificed. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He hadn't given up anything. He'd just finally figured out what actually mattered. Years later, when Clara asked him if he ever regretted it, the disguise, the risk, the choice to build a life so different from the one he'd been raised for, Rhett thought about the question seriously. Then he looked at Clara, weathered and strong and absolutely beautiful, standing in the orchard her mother had planted and she'd saved, with their children playing in the wildflowers that still bloomed every spring. He thought about the life they'd built together, messy and hard and real in ways his old life had never been. "No," he said, "I don't regret it. Not even a little." Clara smiled, the one that still made his heart skip. "Good, because you're stuck with me now." "Best decision I ever made." "Worst proposal I ever received." "You've only received one." "Exactly." But she was laughing when she said it, and Rhett was laughing too, and Bear, ancient now, barely moving, thumped his tail in agreement. This was what Rhett had been searching for when he dressed as a nobody and showed up asking for work. Not proof that love existed without wealth. Not validation that he was worthy beyond his money. Just this: a home where he was valued for what he did, not what he owned. A partner who challenged him and chose him in equal measure. A life built on truth instead of pretense. The orchard taught him that sometimes you had to lose everything you thought you wanted to find what you actually needed. That disguises revealed more than they hid. That the woman everyone overlooked could be exactly the person who saw you most clearly. Clara taught him that love wasn't about grand gestures or saving anyone. It was about showing up, doing the work, choosing each other when it was hard just as much as when it was easy, building something together that neither could build alone. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The orchard stood for generations, bearing fruit and bearing witness to the truth that some stories don't follow expected patterns. That sometimes the rich man finds his fortune by giving it up. That sometimes the overlooked woman turns out to be exactly the one worth finding. That sometimes the best lives are built not on what you have, but on who you choose to become. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed among the apple trees, people would remember the story of the cattle baron who pretended to be poor and the orchard girl who taught him what wealth really meant. They'd remember it not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder that love works best when it's built on truth, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is show up honestly and see what grows. Clara and Rhett lived that truth every day of their lives together. And it was imperfect and challenging and absolutely real, more than either of them had ever dreamed of finding.